An X-ray of a mummified ibis, on view as part of the Brooklyn Museum exhibition Soulful Creatures Animal Mummies in Ancient Egypt. Brooklyn Museum doggy daycare, cat cafes, pet grooming emporiums, animal memorial parks. Is any population more deeply engaged with its fellow creatures than contemporary Americans? Discover the ancient Egyptians. You can do just that at the Brooklyn Museum, which is presenting the New York debut of what its officials think is the first exhibition ever on an intriguing, if slightly macabre, topic: animal mummies. The same ibis mummy in its wrappings at the Brooklyn Museum. The ancient Egyptians associated the bird with Thoth, god of magic and wisdom. Sarah DeSantis, Brooklyn Museum. They are probably the most numerous objects to come from ancient Egypt, said Yekaterina Barbash, the museum's associate curator of Egyptian art, in an interview during the show's installation. A dog cemetery at the burial ground in Saqqara alone yielded $7 million. After the museum's staff discovered dozens of neglected and uncatalogued animal mummies from its own Egyptian collection in its storerooms, she said, "We wanted to figure out how these huge numbers, millions upon millions, actually functioned. The result is Soulful Creatures Animal Mummies in Ancient Egypt, which includes not only 30 examples and a solitary human one for comparison, but also coffins and funerary jars, along with related sculptures, decorative objects, offering tables and inscribed slabs." There is also one distinctly 21st century touch CT scans showing, sometimes surprisingly, what is really inside those containers and linen wrappings. Although nothing survives that specifically explains the mummy's purpose, Egyptologists know the ancients' attitude beasts were not inferior to people. The Egyptians also believed that animals have souls, which is a real break from their neighbors in the Mediterranean, said Edward Bleiberg, senior curator of Egyptian, classical and ancient Near Eastern art, who organized the show with Dr. Barbash. The contemporaneous Hebrew, Greek and Roman cultures either condemned or ridiculed this tenet. Still, the curators have taken pains to erase some popular misconceptions. The ancient Egyptians did not worship entire species, not even their splendid cats, whose mummies, well represented in the exhibition, sometimes appear in casings bearing traces of their original gilding. These weren't your run-of-the-mill New York City cat that would sleep by the window, said Dr. Anthony Fischerty, a staff doctor and the head of diagnostic imaging and radiology at the Animal Medical Center in Manhattan, who helped identify the mummified remains. Ancient cats tended to have a longer nose and greater length to their skull. A cat coffin with a mummy is part of the Brooklyn Museum show. Sarah DeSantis, Brooklyn Museum. Nor did the Egyptians believe that their gods actually took animal, or half-animal, form, Dr. Barbash said. Art depicting the deities as creatures is more metaphorical, illustrating qualities they were thought to have. Because, for instance, jackals and wild dogs roamed near desert burial grounds, they were seen as protectors of the deceased, Dr. Barbash said. Their keen senses also led them to be represented as Anubis, the deity who guides the dead into the underworld. Appropriately, a grand painted wooden Anubis, from the 1st millennium BC, stands sentinel at the entrance to Soulful Creatures. Although such animals enjoyed spiritual equality with humans, ancient Egyptians still ate meat and put domestic beasts to work. Most animal mummies buried with people, like those of ducks and geese, were intended as food for the departed. A smaller number were royal pets. Those interred separately, however, had religious significance, and no creature was considered too small. The show, running through January 21, includes mummified scarab beetles, associated with creation mythology, and even tiny shrews. Shrews are actually capable of killing snakes, Bleiberg said, and because snakes threaten the sun god, any animal that killed snakes was seen as a protector. The ancient Egyptians also regarded certain individual animals, especially cattle with specific markings, as incarnations of particular gods. After death, these were mummified and buried with great pomp. Egyptologists have interpreted the more ordinary animal mummies, however, as divine offerings, gifts of gratitude. But because all creatures were believed to have souls that could merge with the deity's souls after death, Dr. Bleiberg proposes a different view. The mummies were pleas for help rather than thank yous. We think that if you had a particular request, he said, you would arrange with the priests to have an animal mummy made of the proper type to approach the god you wanted to approach. Inscriptions and ancient letters in animal tombs, asking for favors ranging from good health to revenge, bolster his theory. Dr. Bleiberg asserts that this mummification became an industry, with temples devoted to the animal's breeding, nurturing and ultimate sacrifice. Wealthy customers could afford bronze mummy fittings and elaborate coffins like some of those in the show. A baboon applique from an animal mummy, possibly from Saqqara, Egypt. Gavin Ashworth. Brooklyn Museum analyses of the case's interiors, however, sometimes astonished the curators. "We could really compare different mummies," said Tina March, an associate conservator who worked on the exhibition with Dr. Fischerty and Lisa Bruno, the museum's chief conservator. She pointed to a mummified ibis, a bird associated with Thoth, god of magic and wisdom. While the mummy has a human shape and a detailed wooden bird's head attached, a CT scan reveals just a bundle of feathers inside. Other scans show partial remains of two mummies in a single case. One cat mummy contains only sand and pebbles. The curators don't know if these versions were created for less affluent customers or indicated that Egyptian priests weren't always honest with their clientele. Other mummies, though, offer glorious secrets. One of the most impressive in Soulful Creatures is a huge cat, probably wild, with an elegantly painted cartonnage, or plaster case, circa 750,390 BC. The case is inscribed with a title that translates as Osiris, the cat, linking the animal's soul with Osiris, the powerful god ruling the afterlife. But what really struck the curators showed up on a scan. The front paws are crossed as a human mummy's hands would have been placed, Dr. Barbash said. This animal was really embalmed very much like the humans. No one knows, however, if the animal's position was a matter of reverence or convenience. Like so much of ancient Egypt, this cat retains its mystery. Soulful Creatures: Animal Mummies in Ancient Egypt through January 21 at the Brooklyn Museum. 7,186,385,000, brooklynmuseum.org.